Let's talk a little bit about competition. Going back to the telephone analogy. It was competition that fostered innovation to change and improve the focus on customer intimacy and product leadership while keeping the strength in operational excellence. It was competition that did that. The 10-year breakup of AT&T was completed in 1984. After that breakup, the telephone industry was no longer a monopoly. A combination of new technologies, which were computers, and companies began to compete for dominance. The end result has been innovation, and it was competition that did that. In the last 30 years, we've gone from basic telephones to bundled services. We now have telephone, wired and wireless. We have entertainment, and we have internet service. This innovation is seen by many consumers as being a minimum requirement for survival. Think about it. How many of you in this room are ready to go home today and tell your families, yeah, let's go back to just one telephone in the living room. We don't need cell phones. We don't need internet. We don't need TV. Consumers are now willing to part with thousands of dollars per year. And to the manufacturers, that's a continuous stream of revenue. And people are willing to maintain and expand these minimum survival tactics. I mean, think about it. That's what this country is about. It's one of the reasons why I love this country. From the 1990s through the turn of the century, the plumbing industry has experienced the same trends as the U.S. manufacturing industry in general. The balance of value disciplines began to change from the previous 80 years, and that change came quite quickly. As opportunities for growth or loss of market share presented themselves, companies responded. Several of the major players in the North American plumbing industry began to serve the retail markets, as you can see from all of the logos on this chart. To serve these national organizations, manufacturers had to develop attractive packaging, speedier delivery, barcoding, nationwide service. Manufacturers were required to build up and reinforce their logistics capabilities. Logistics are things like transportation, supply chain, distribution, and warehousing operations. And in addition, they had to improve, or we had to improve, our customer service to serve both the retail customers, the end consumers, and our commercial customers. Going to retail has long been considered a challenge. It's still not a favorite thing. I don't think any manufacturer in this room would tell you how much they love serving retail. But going to retail is primarily credited by many as being the opportunity that saved their fiscal year in 2009 when the downturn hit commercial sectors in our industry harder than it had in the last few years. This new infrastructure allowed companies to focus on product development, and that product development was based on consumer research. Function had now started to turn to fashion. We heard a little bit about that yesterday from American Standard. One example that I had personal involvement with was the development of the Moen Monticello line of faucets. You can see a picture of it here. In the early 1990s, Moen decided that based on consumer research, that the market could use a new, fresh design for a traditional bathroom faucet. Previous new products launched at Moen had had marginal success. The company's infrastructure had been honed on efficient manufacturing and shunned making new or different things. Also, Moen at the time didn't really have a formal product design or development discipline. The gentleman that spoke yesterday from American Standard, that function didn't really exist in plumbing companies at that point in time. Moen partnered with a company called Priority Designs, and I pulled a picture from the web of that company. They're still in existence today. They're based in the Columbus area. The new design was innovative. It crossed the gap between traditional and contemporary design. I can remember being in executive meetings where we were trying to figure out how much to charge for this product. The market was used to paying a consistent number, and this product was to be sold at a premium. It was something different. But how much? We arrived at a number with a lot of hesitancy. And the end result was that we could have charged more. But the real lesson learned was that consumer need had been brought together with a disciplined product development process. It was supported by marketing. It was supported by logistics, by the sales, and by operations. And this all happened in the early part of an unprecedented 18-year economic expansion that resulted in double-digit growth for many in our industry. The bottom line is that it worked, and there was no turning back. Prior to the 1980s, code compliance in the plumbing industry was an aspect of operational excellence that was kind of sustained on a traditional level. Although codes were renewed during their normal cycle, significant changes in codes and standards didn't really start happening until the late 1990s, with one notable exception, and that's the warning label that I have here on the screen. And that was the passage of Proposition 65 here in California. And that happened in the late 1980s. Throughout the 1990s, this law that regulates substances known to the state of California to, quote, cause cancer or reproductive toxicity, end quote, spawned a new industry. That industry was fueled by the bounty hunter provision in the law that allowed individuals or organizations with the backing of the state attorney general to sue manufacturers who they felt violated the law. The California Bar has a section dedicated to Prop 65. Manufacturers that are sued under this legislation have three options. One, they can settle, and that's usually a 6- or 7-figure cost, but it's the lowest cost option. Two, they can fight it in court, and they almost never do that because it's not the lowest cost option. Or three, they can use the defense that Baxter Pharmaceuticals successfully employed in 2002, and that is to sue the state and have the chemical under which they were sued delisted. But even that didn't happen until 2002, almost 15 years after that law came out. Prop 65 is one of the founding green challenges that manufacturers have faced for over 20 years, and we continue to face it. Lead is one of the ingredients in brass, a longtime staple in some plumbing products. When some members of the plumbing industry were sued in the early 1990s under Prop 65 for lead content, almost overnight the challenges of regulation and legal action changed the manufacturing status quo. Product compliance groups that certainly were not in the forefront of operationally excellent companies were now center stage. Aside from the spawn of the bounty hunters and the litigation service organizations that resulted from Prop 65, manufacturers turned to third-party certification organizations to be able to claim that independently that their products were compliant. Methodologies for testing and analysis were developed through consensus-based code and standards organizations. Much of the service that the Plumbing Manufacturers Institute provides to our members has to do with the ever-expanding codes and standards, and also the ever-expanding interest groups involved in commerce. Think about how much certifiers, code organizations, and industry groups that serve these needs, have expanded over the years. Combine that with the non-industry groups that have promoted individual agendas, and you can see how things have become more complicated for manufacturers. Organizations like IAPMO have done a phenomenal job at leveraging services to manufacturers in this area of need. The challenges of Prop 65 and other product regulations have resulted in opportunities for certifiers. A quick review of the websites of the American Society of Sanitary Engineers, the ASSE, the ASTM International, NSF International, the International Code Council, and even here at IAPMO will show that there are over 200 standards that impact industry. As technology has improved and society has become more demanding of product performance, codes and standards have developed at an increasing rate. And the obsolescence of these codes and standards has also developed at an increasing rate. Suffice it to say that codes and standards and the accompanying certifications that are required play a much bigger part today with plumbing manufacturers than they did 30 years ago. But let's talk about the #1 challenge. Regardless of color, you can call it any color you want, green, blue, or black, that everyone in our industry and in our economy has been focusing on is the U.S. residential building situation. These are housing starts going back. In the 9 years prior to 2008, housing starts in the U.S. were above 1.5 million a year. That had not happened before, and it was not sustainable. In the fall of 2008, I read an article that said in the Miami area, there were 111 months of residential inventory. That means that you could sell all those, but it would take 10 years. There are buildings in Florida that will never be finished. They're going to be torn down when they're half built. It's because there's nobody there to buy them right now. As you all know, these numbers are staggering, and they're starting to improve. And we all hope that the bottom was hit in 2009. But at that point, housing starts were 25% of the high that was reached just 4 years earlier.